The porcelain teacup trembled in Su Mingxi's hand, a delicate tremor mirroring the unease churning within her. Across the polished mahogany table, Rong Ziming sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the garden outside, the tension radiating off him a tangible force. She knew he was waiting for her. The Real Su Yang. Only, the woman stepping out of the chauffeured car wasn't Su Yang. Not really. Su Mingxi took a slow, measured sip of the cooling tea, the bitter tang a stark contrast to the saccharine smile plastered on the newcomer's face. Ziming. The voice, melodic and carefully modulated, cut through the strained silence. Su Mingxi watched, her expression carefully neutral, as Rong Ziming rose to greet the impostor. Su Sini, or rather, Zhou Yuanyuan, the name whispered to Su Mingxi by her informant, the same informant who'd provided photographic proof of the elaborate charade, launched herself into Rong Ziming's arms. Su Mingxi felt a flicker of something cold and hard settle in her chest. Not jealousy, not exactly. Perhaps something closer to contempt. He held her for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before releasing her. Sini, you're back. His voice, normally clipped and controlled, held a tremor of emotion that made something twist uncomfortably low in Su Mingxi's stomach. He still loves her, she thought, the realization not a surprise but a confirmation of a bitter truth she had long accepted. Ziming, I missed you so much, Su Sini breathed, her eyes shining with what Su Mingxi knew was a carefully crafted performance. Her gaze flickered toward Su Mingxi, a subtle challenge in the depths of her manufactured affection. And you must be Mingxi. Su Mingxi met her gaze, a faint smile playing on her lips. Yes, she replied, her voice soft but steady. Ziming's wife. The word wife felt strange, heavy on her tongue. A contractual obligation, a role she played. A role she was becoming increasingly adept at. Later that evening, the three of them sat around the same mahogany table, the atmosphere thicker than the rich aroma of the jasmine tea. Rong Ziming remained withdrawn, lost in his own thoughts, while Su Sini filled the silence with carefully curated stories of her time abroad. Su Mingxi listened, observing, picking up on the subtle inconsistencies, the carefully crafted lies woven into the narrative. Your smile isn't right, Rong Ziming said suddenly, his voice low and rough, breaking through Su Sini's carefully constructed facade. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Su Mingxi's heart quickened. He noticed it too. The subtle difference, the slight shift in the curve of her lips. He was starting to see through the deception. Su Sini's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, before quickly returning, brighter, more forced than before. What do you mean, Ziming? I'm just happy to be back with you. Her voice, though still sweet, held a tight edge. He didn't respond, his gaze intense, searching. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Su Mingxi felt a strange sense of satisfaction bloom in her chest. The cracks were starting to show. The following days were a delicate dance of veiled truths and outright lies. Su Sini, growing increasingly desperate, ramped up her performance, her declarations of love becoming more dramatic, more theatrical. Rong Ziming, torn between his lingering feelings and the nagging doubts that plagued him, grew increasingly distant, withdrawing further into himself. Su Mingxi, meanwhile, continued to play her role, the docile, obedient wife. But beneath the surface, a plan was forming, a slow, burning ember of revenge ignited by the injustice of it all. She would expose Su Sini, not for herself, not entirely, but for the memory of the Real Su Yang, the woman whose identity had been stolen, whose life had been erased. One evening, Rong Ziming called her into his study. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive cigars. He held a checkbook in his hand. Mingxi, he began, his voice strained, I promised Grandpa to marry you. to fulfill the contract. Booty can't offer you more than that. He ripped out a check, the numbers written in bold, stark against the pale paper. This is for your cooperation. Su Mingxi looked at the check, then back at him, her expression unreadable. Cooperation. The word echoed in her mind, hollow and meaningless. She thought of Su Xinyi's triumphant smile, the way she clung to Rong Ziming's arm, the possessive glint in her eyes. She thought of the Real Su Yang, the woman whose life had been twisted and stolen. And then, she did something unexpected. She pushed the check back across the desk. I don't want money, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I really love you. The lie felt like a betrayal, a sharp shard of glass lodged in her throat. But it was a necessary lie, a strategic move in the game she was playing. Rong Ziming's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to disbelief crossing his features. He stared at her, searching for something, some sign of deceit, but Su Mingxi held his gaze, her expression carefully blank. The truth, however, was far more complex. The lie she uttered, the declaration of love, was a seed, planted in fertile ground. A seed that, unbeknownst to her, would take root and blossom into something real, something powerful, something that would change the course of all their lives. Days turned into weeks. The tension in the house grew palpable, a silent war waged between glances and whispers. Su Mingxi, armed with the knowledge of Su Xinyi's true identity, began to subtly plant seeds of doubt in Rong Ziming's mind. She would casually mention details that the real Su Yang would have known, details that Su Xinyi, despite her meticulous preparation, couldn't possibly recall. Small inconsistencies, carefully placed, like pebbles dislodging a landslide. The climax arrived during a lavish dinner party, the opulent dining room filled with the city's elite. Su Mingxi, dressed in a simple but elegant gown, stood beside Rong Ziming, watching as Su Xinyi, resplendent in diamonds and silk, charmed the guests with her fabricated stories. The charade was almost complete. Almost. Zhou Yuanyuan, a voice boomed from the doorway, shattering the carefully crafted illusion. Han Fei stood there, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. He'd been promised a hefty sum for his part in the deception altering Zhou Yuanyuan's appearance to resemble Su Yang, but promises, as Su Mingxi knew, could be easily broken. Su Xinyi's carefully constructed facade crumbled, her face draining of color. The room fell silent, all eyes turning towards her, the whispers starting like a wildfire spreading through dry brush. Rong Ziming turned to her, his eyes cold and hard, the last vestiges of his affection replaced by a chilling disillusionment. Who is this man? Su Xinyi stammered, her voice trembling. Han Fei stepped forward, pulling out a photograph, holding it up for all to see. It was a picture of Zhou Yuanyuan, before the surgery, before the transformation. The resemblance was undeniable. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and murmurs. The truth, raw and ugly, was laid bare for all to see. The game was over. And Su Mingxi, standing silently beside Rong Ziming, felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, the cold, hard stone in her chest finally dissolving into something resembling hope. The ice clinked softly against the crystal, a brittle sound echoing the fragility of the situation. Rong Ziming swirled the amber liquid, the dim bar lights painting flickering shadows across his sharp features. He hadn't touched a drop, the tension tightening his chest like a coiled spring. He was waiting. Waiting for the storm he knew was brewing. He glanced at the door each time it opened, a flicker of apprehension, anticipation, and something akin to dread twisting in his gut. He hadn't realized how much the 3 years had changed him, softened him, until this very moment. The prospect of seeing her again, the woman who occupied his memories like a phantom limb, both thrilled and terrified him. The bell above the door chimed, a discordant note in the hushed ambience. His breath hitched. It was her. Su Yang. Or at least, that's who she claimed to be. She stood framed in the doorway, the light catching the familiar curve of her jaw, the same cascade of dark hair he remembered. But something was different. A subtle hardening around her eyes, a sharper edge to her smile. He pushed himself to his feet, the leather of the booth creaking beneath him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat accompanying the rising tide of uncertainty. Had he idealized her? Had 3 years of absence woven a tapestry of illusion? Zimming, she breathed, her voice a silken whisper that snaked through the quiet bar. He saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes as she took in his appearance, the subtle lines etched around his eyes, the weariness he couldn't quite mask. He had changed, weathered by time and circumstance, but the core of him, the part that still belonged to her, remained unchanged. He managed a smile, a strained curve of his lips. Su Yang, he acknowledged, the name feeling both familiar and foreign on his tongue. The years of separation stretched between them, a chasm filled with unspoken words and unanswered questions. Her gaze flickered past him, lingering on the empty seat opposite. I didn't expect you to be here. Alone, she added, a hint of something unreadable in her voice. Was it disappointment? He couldn't decipher it. I wasn't alone, he corrected, his voice a low rumble, his gaze meeting hers directly. He saw a flicker of confusion, a tightening of her lips. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Enough for the last vestiges of doubt to crumble away. My wife was here just a moment ago. She stepped out to take a call. The blood drained from her face, leaving her features stark. Wife, she echoed, the word a disbelieving whisper. He watched her carefully, searching for the genuine Su Yang beneath the carefully constructed facade. Yes, he confirmed, his voice unwavering. We married 3 years ago. Shortly after you left. The silence hung heavy between them, thick with unspoken accusations and regrets. He could practically taste the bitterness on his tongue. This wasn't how he'd imagined their reunion. He had envisioned tears, explanations, perhaps even forgiveness. Not this cold, brittle standoff. Married, she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief, with a hint of anger. But how could you? He almost laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. How could he? The irony was almost unbearable. How could I? He echoed, the question hanging in the air between them. Perhaps you should ask yourself the same question. He watched her, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't the Su Yang he knew. This was a carefully crafted imitation, a ghost wearing the skin of his memories. The door opened again, and Su Mingxi walked in, her phone still pressed to her ear. She paused, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the scene. Her gaze shifted from him to Su Cini and back again, a flicker of understanding, of something almost resembling amusement, dancing in her eyes. He gestured toward Su Mingxi. Su Yang, this is my wife, Su Mingxi. Then, turning to Su Mingxi, he continued, Mingxi, this is Su Yang, an old friend. The words felt heavy, laden with a weight of deceit and unspoken truths. Su Mingxi's eyes met his, a subtle understanding passing between them. She offered a polite, almost detached smile to Su Cini. It's a pleasure to meet you, she said, her voice smooth and unreadable. Su Cini stared at Su Mingxi, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Rome Ziming's white moonlight has returned, she had joked with Han Fei earlier that day. Now, facing the woman who had taken her place, the joke felt like a cruel twist of fate. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and a cold fear began to grip her heart. "My stand-in is probably going to be fired," Su Mingxi had murmured to her sister, Su Ran, on the phone just moments ago, a wry twist to her lips. Now, facing the woman she had been impersonating, a strange sense of calm settled over her. This was it. The confrontation she had been anticipating, dreading, and strangely looking forward to. Su Xinyi's gaze darted between Rong Ziming and Su Mingxi, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. You married her," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had gambled everything on this reunion, on reclaiming her place in Rong Ziming's life. And she was losing. "As long as you're happy, I'm willing to do anything," Su Xinyi had told Rong Ziming years ago, her voice filled with a fervent sincerity. Now, the words echoed in her mind, a mocking reminder of her past naivete. She had been willing to do anything for him. But he had moved on. He had found someone else. And she was left with nothing. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated only by the soft clinking of ice against glass. The three of them stood frozen, caught in a tableau of unspoken words and shattered illusions. The truth, like a venomous serpent, had slithered into their midst, poised to strike and shatter the fragile peace. The jade bracelet felt cool against Su Mingxi's skin, a stark contrast to the simmering resentment that coiled within her. She turned it slowly, the intricate carvings catching the light, a gift from Rong Ziming. A conciliatory gesture. He thinks trinkets can appease me. The thought flitted through her mind, a bitter taste on her tongue. She knew its worth, a small fortune on her wrist, a stark reminder of the gilded cage she inhabited. Financial security, it had been her initial objective. Security for Su Ran, her younger sister, whose bright future depended on Su Mingxi's arrangement. A gilded cage is still a cage. Rong Ziming sat across from her, his brow furrowed as he perused documents, the lines of his face etched with a weariness she was beginning to recognize. She wondered if it was Su Xinyi, that phantom limb of a relationship, that haunted his peace. "White moonlight," he'd murmured once, a wistful tone coloring his voice, his eyes distant and lost. Su Mingxi had schooled her face into a placid mask, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. White moonlight is just white moonlight. Reflected glory. Nothing more. Over the next few days, the house hummed with a strained normalcy. Su Xinyi, radiating a fragile beauty, would drift through the rooms like a perfumed ghost, her laughter a carefully calibrated chime. Su Mingxi watched, her gaze sharp, noting the subtle manipulations, the calculated touches on Rong Ziming's arm, the delicate sighs that hinted at a shared past. A past she stole. The thought was a venomous whisper in her ear, a constant reminder of the charade. Su Mingxi had heard the whispers amongst the staff, the hushed reverence for Su Yang, Rong Ziming's lost love, returned as if by a miracle. A miracle crafted by a scalpel and a web of lies. "That dog of a man is really quite tempting when he's gentle," Su Ran remarked one afternoon, observing Rong Ziming helping Su Xinyi with a shawl. Su Mingxi had met her sister's gaze, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "The one I love most is of course you, little money," she retorted, her voice light, though her grip on her teacup tightened. Su Ran chuckled, unaware of the tempest brewing beneath her sister's composed facade. The charade was elaborate, almost flawless. Almost. But Su Mingxi had noticed the discrepancies, the subtle shifts in Su Xinyi's demeanor, the inconsistencies in her stories. She remembered the real Su Yang, a vibrant, outspoken woman, nothing like this fragile imitation. The fire that was the key. 3 years ago, the fire that had ravaged her face, stolen her identity, and forced her into this bargain. The fire that had coincided with Su Yang's supposed disappearance. Coincidence? I think not. She began to piece together fragments of information, whispers overheard, news articles meticulously scrutinized. Su Yang had been traveling abroad, supposedly. No witnesses to the accident that had claimed her life. Just gone. And then, 3 years later, this resurrection. A meeting with Han Fei, a plastic surgeon renowned for his artistry, confirmed her suspicions. He'd arrived at the Rong estate, his face pale and drawn, his eyes darting nervously towards Su Cini. Su Mingxi had observed their interaction, a silent observer in the shadows. The tension between them, the barely concealed panic in Han Fei's eyes, spoke volumes. He's afraid. The realization sent a thrill of anticipation through her. He knows something. Days turned into weeks, each day a carefully constructed performance. Su Mingxi played her role, the docile, grateful wife, all the while gathering her evidence, weaving her net. The dependence on Rong Ziming grated on her, each act of generosity a reminder of her compromised position. He pities me. The thought was a bitter pill, harder to swallow than the lies she was forced to endure. She longed for the day she could cast off this mask, reclaim her identity, and expose the truth. One evening, Rong Ziming found her in the library, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and magazines. He paused at the doorway, watching her, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Su Mingxi looked up, her gaze steady. "Researching," she replied, her voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil within. She watched him carefully, gauging his reaction. He frowned slightly, his eyes scanning the headlines. "Researching what?" "The past," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Rong Ziming stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "What about the past?" "The fire," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "The fire 3 years ago." His face paled, the color draining from his cheeks. He knew. He had to know. The dates, the coincidence, it was all too clear. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Su Mingxi held his gaze, her own eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and triumph. "The game is almost over." "The fire that disfigured Su Yang," she finished, the name hanging in the air like a poison dart. Rong Ziming staggered back as if struck, his eyes wide with disbelief. Su Mingxi watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. The truth was out. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling. And in its ruins, a new future, uncertain and terrifying, began to take shape. The opulent Rong family home, a fortress of marble and mahogany, felt like a gilded cage. Su Mingxi traced the delicate porcelain of a teacup, the warmth failing to reach the chill in her heart. Su Cini, draped in silk and radiating a triumphant smile, had cornered her in the sunroom, the glass walls offering no escape from the venom in her words. "You're a clever girl, Su Mingxi," Su Cini purred, her voice laced with false sweetness. "But cleverness can only take you so far. Ziming will always be mine. You're just a temporary inconvenience." Su Mingxi's fingers tightened around the teacup, her knuckles white. "She's testing me," she thought, trying to gauge my fear. Outwardly, Su Mingxi maintained a facade of calm, her eyes meeting Su Cini's with an unsettling stillness. "I understand my place, Miss Su," she replied, her voice soft yet firm. "But a contract is a contract. Ziming will honor his obligations." Inside, a storm raged. Fear gnawed at her, but beneath it, a fierce determination solidified. She would not be intimidated. Not by this woman, not by anyone. The following days were a blur of veiled threats and subtle manipulations. Su Cini's mother, a woman with a face like a hawk and eyes that missed nothing, joined the offensive. She cornered Su Mengshi in the market, her voice a harsh whisper amidst the bustling crowd. "Get away from my son," she hissed, clutching Su Mengshi's arm with surprising strength. 5 million. I'll give you 5 million. Leave the Rong family immediately. Su Mengshi, momentarily stunned by the blatant proposition, felt a cold fury rise within her. "Who's your mom?" she retorted, her voice low and dangerous, yanking her arm free. The audacity of this woman, trying to buy her off like some cheap trinket. The contempt in Su Mengshi's eyes was a tangible force, silencing the older woman for a moment. "They underestimate me," she mused, a flicker of icy amusement dancing in her eyes. "They think money is all I want. But they were wrong. So very wrong." One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of violet and gray, Su Mengshi found herself walking along a deserted side street. A black van screeched to a halt beside her, the door sliding open to reveal two burly men. Fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. This is it, she thought, this is how it ends. But even as her heart hammered against her ribs, her mind raced, searching for an escape. She screamed, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that sliced through the quiet evening. The sudden appearance of a security guard, alerted by the commotion, startled the would-be kidnappers. They hesitated, their surprise giving Su Mengshi the precious seconds she needed. She bolted, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, the adrenaline coursing through her veins a potent cocktail of fear and raw survival instinct. She didn't stop running until she reached the brightly lit main street, the bustling crowds a welcome sanctuary. She knew, with chilling certainty, that Su Sini was behind the attempted abduction. Rong Ziming found her huddled on a park bench, her face pale, her body trembling. He had been frantically searching for her after receiving a garbled phone call from a distraught Su Ran. Relief washed over him, so potent it left him weak-kneed. He knelt before her, his voice rough with concern. "Mengshi, are you all right? What happened?" She looked at him, her eyes wide and dark, the fear still clinging to her like a shroud. He saw the terror in her eyes, the fragility beneath the usual mask of composure, and something shifted within him. The detached concern he had carefully cultivated crumbled, replaced by a raw, visceral protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "This isn't Su Yang," his subconscious whispered, "this is Mengshi. And she needs you." He wrapped his arms around her, drawing her close, the warmth of his body a tangible comfort against the lingering chill of fear. Later, back at the Rong estate, Su Mengshi recounted the events of the evening, her voice shaking slightly. Rong Ziming listened, his face grim, his jaw clenched. The realization that someone had tried to harm her, that they had come so close to succeeding, filled him with a rage he had never known he possessed. "This ends now," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll find out who did this, and they will pay." He looked at Su Mengshi, his gaze softening. "You're not alone in this, Mengshi. I won't let anything happen to you." The sincerity in his voice, the genuine concern in his eyes, resonated deep within her. For the first time since their marriage began, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there could be something real between them. The investigation into the attempted kidnapping moved swiftly. Rong Ziming, utilizing his considerable resources and influence, unearthed a trail that led directly back to Su Sini and her mother. He confronted them, the evidence laid out before them like a damning indictment. Su Sini, stripped of her usual composure, denied everything, her voice shrill and panicked. But her mother, her face ashen, broke down, confessing everything. It was then that the full truth emerged. Su Sini was not Su Yang. She was Zhou Yuanyuan, a childhood friend who had undergone extensive plastic surgery to assume Su Yang's identity. The real Su Yang had been living a quiet life, unaware of the elaborate charade being played out in her name. Roam Zimming was stunned, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. He looked at Su Mengshi, her face pale but composed, and a wave of shame washed over him. He had been so blind, so caught up in his past, that he had failed to see the truth that had been right in front of him. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and the carefully constructed facade of normalcy shattered into a million pieces. The future of their relationships hung precariously in the balance, shrouded in uncertainty and the bitter taste of betrayal. The rain hammered against the windowpane, a relentless rhythm mirroring the unease churning in Roam Zimming's gut. He watched Su Mengshi across the breakfast table, her gaze fixed on the swirling milk in her teacup. Her silence had become a familiar weight, a constant reminder of the chasm that separated them. He'd married her as a substitute, a pale imitation of the woman who had once held his heart. Yet, lately, the lines were blurring. There was a resilience in her silence, a hidden strength that peeked through the facade of docility. Could she really be just a stand-in? Mengshi, he began, the words catching in his throat. He'd been rehearsing this conversation for days, the questions swirling in his mind like the storm outside. But the words evaporated as he met her eyes, a fleeting flicker off was it recognition? He pushed the thought away. It was absurd. I've been meaning to ask, she finally looked up, her expression unreadable. He hesitated, the questions retreating again. This charade, this pretense of a marriage, was wearing him down. He needed answers. He needed Su Yang. But the woman sitting before him, with her quiet strength and enigmatic gaze, was starting to unravel the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Days bled into one another, a tapestry woven with suspicion and uncertainty. He found himself seeking out Su Mengshi's company, drawn to the quiet solitude she offered. He observed her, searching for a flicker of the woman he'd lost, a hint of Su Yang in her mannerisms, her words. There were moments, fleeting and elusive, when he almost believed a phone call shattered the fragile peace. It was Han Fei, his voice tight with anxiety. Mr. Rong, I need to see you. It's about Su Yang. The meeting took place in a dimly lit bar, the air thick with smoke and apprehension. Han Fei's hands trembled as he pushed a file across the table. I can't keep this secret any longer. It's about Zhou Yuanyuan. The name was unfamiliar. Roam Zimming frowned, his gaze fixed on the file. Inside were photographs, medical records, a meticulously documented deception. The woman he believed to be Su Yang, the woman he'd mourned for years, was an impostor. Zhou Yuanyuan. The name echoed in his mind, a hollow sound that amplified the hollowness in his chest. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He'd been living a lie, a carefully constructed illusion orchestrated by the woman he trusted. Rage warred with disbelief. He thought of Su Mengshi, her quiet strength, her enigmatic gaze. Had she known? Had she been watching him all along, silently bearing witness to his folly? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He confronted Su Yang, in a crowded shopping mall, the glittering displays a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. She stood before him, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. Zimming, what's wrong? 50 million, he said, his voice cold and hard. Would that satisfy you? Her facade crumbled, replaced by a flash of anger. What are you talking about? Zhou Yuanyuan, he said, the name dripping with contempt. I know everything. The color drained from her face. He watched as the carefully constructed mask slipped away, revealing the manipulative, ambitious woman beneath. I have never loved you for a moment, she hissed, her voice laced with venom. You were just a means to an end. Su Mengshi appeared beside him, her presence a silent rebuke. He hadn't even realized she was there. The look in her eyes, a mixture of sadness and understanding, pierced through the fog of anger and betrayal. He turned to her, the words tumbling out. I didn't know. I was blind. You didn't say, she replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. But I couldn't tell. Her words, simple yet profound, struck a chord deep within him. He saw her then, not as a substitute, but as a woman of remarkable strength and resilience. He had been so focused on the ghost of his past that he had failed to see the treasure standing before him. The confrontation escalated, Zhou Yuanyuan's desperation fueling her rage. She lashed out at Su Mengshi, accusing her of scheming, of manipulating him. But Su Mengshi remained calm, her composure a stark contrast to Zhou Yuanyuan's hysteria. The scene unfolded in the heart of the bustling mall, a private drama played out on a public stage. Shoppers paused, their curious gazes adding another layer of discomfort to the already charged atmosphere. Rong Ziming watched, his heart aching with a mixture of guilt and admiration for Su Mengshi. He saw the strength he had overlooked, the intelligence that had been hidden beneath her quiet demeanor. He realized, with a clarity that startled him, that he was falling in love with his contractual wife, the woman he had initially dismissed as a mere stand-in. The arrival of security guards brought the chaotic scene to an end. Zhou Yuanyuan was escorted away, her venomous words echoing in the air. Rong Ziming turned to Su Mengshi, his heart heavy with the weight of his past mistakes. The future stretched before them, uncertain and fragile. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw a glimmer of hope, a shared understanding that transcended the lies and deception that had brought them to this point. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the path ahead. The Su family home, once a symbol of comfort for Rong Ziming, now felt suffocating. A cold dread coiled in his stomach, each breath a laborious task. The air crackled with unspoken truths, heavy with the weight of years of deception. He watched Su Mengshi, her usual gentle composure replaced by a steely resolve. Her eyes, usually soft and yielding, now burned with an unfamiliar intensity. What don't I know? He wondered, the question a chilling whisper in the echoing chambers of his mind. He had come seeking answers about Su Yang, the ghost of his past that haunted his present. But the answers he found threatened to shatter the fragile peace he had built. Su Mengshi stood before the Su family, a storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. She had played the docile wife, the quiet shadow, for long enough. Tonight, the mask would fall. They think they know me, she thought, her fingers curling into fists. They think I'm just a replacement, a stand-in. They have no idea. Her gaze flickered to Su Sini, the woman who had stolen her life, her family, her very identity. The faintest hint of a smile played on her lips, a smile that held no warmth, only the icy promise of retribution. She's the one fighting with me for Ziming, Su Sini's voice, shrill and laced with desperation, sliced through the tense silence. She pointed a trembling finger at Su Mengshi. Fear pulsed through her veins, a frantic hummingbird trapped in her chest. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for so long was beginning to crumble, revealing the raw panic beneath. He can't know. He mustn't, she thought, the words a frantic prayer. Rong Ziming turned his gaze to Su Mengshi, his brow furrowed in confusion. He searched her face, trying to reconcile the woman he knew with the accusation hurled at her. The woman he had married, quiet and unassuming, could hardly be described as someone who would fight for anything, let alone him. Yet, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a glint of steel that he had never seen before. Su Sini is not your Su Yang, Su Mengshi's voice, clear and strong, resonated through the room. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a dam against the tide of lies that had threatened to drown her. She felt a surge of exhilaration, a sense of liberation as the truth began to unfurl. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long began to recede, replaced by a fierce determination. Rome Zimming felt a jolt, a sudden rush of adrenaline. The air thickened, the room tilting on its axis. What do you mean?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He looked from Su Mingxi to Su Cini, his mind struggling to grasp the implications of her words. The world as he knew it, the carefully constructed reality he had built around his memories of Su Yang, began to disintegrate. Panic flared in Su Cini's eyes, the carefully crafted mask of composure cracking under the weight of Su Mingxi's words. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. She's just jealous," she shrieked, her voice laced with hysteria. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, the lies she had woven for so long unraveling thread by thread. Su Mingxi met her gaze, unflinching. Jealous? Of what? Of stealing another woman's life? Of living a lie? She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. Then, slowly, deliberately, she began to tell her story. The story of the fire, the scars, the desperate escape. The story of how Zhou Yuanyuan, the family nanny, had seized the opportunity to become Su Yang. The room fell silent, the only sound the ragged breaths of the Su family. Disbelief, shock, and dawning horror flickered across their faces as they listened to Su Mingxi's chilling account. The parents, once so proud of their daughter's miraculous recovery, now recoiled in horror, their faces etched with a profound sense of betrayal. Su Cini, cornered and desperate, lashed out. "You're lying. You're trying to ruin me," she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. She lunged at Su Mingxi, her fingers curved like claws. But Rome Zimming, finally understanding the truth, stepped between them, his eyes blazing with anger. "Enough," he roared, his voice echoing through the room. He turned to Su Cini, his gaze cold and unforgiving. "I killed her," Su Cini's voice, barely a whisper, hung in the air, heavy with the weight of confession. The words were a desperate attempt to reclaim control, a final, twisted act of defiance. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and gaunt, the ghost of the woman she pretended to be. Han Fei, his face ashen, stepped forward. His loyalty to Su Cini warred with the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. He confirmed her confession, detailing his role in the deception, the surgeries he performed to transform Zhou Yuanyuan into Su Yang. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, the words tumbling out like stones from a collapsing wall. The truth, raw and brutal, hung in the air, suffocating them all. The Su family, their world shattered, could only stare in stunned silence. Rome Zimming, the weight of years of deception crushing him, felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He looked at Su Mingxi, the real Su Yang, the woman he had unknowingly married, and saw not a replacement, but a survivor. A woman of remarkable strength and resilience. A woman he was beginning to realize he loved. The arrival of the police punctuated the end of the charade. Su Cini and Han Fei were taken away, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and resignation. The house, once filled with the echoes of lies, now stood silent, the air thick with the remnants of betrayal. The future stretched before them, uncertain and daunting. But amidst the wreckage of deception, a flicker of hope remained, a fragile promise of a new beginning. The sterile white of the hospital room pressed down on her, a suffocating weight. A rhythmic beep, steady and insistent, punctuated the silence. Su Mingxi's eyelids fluttered, the world a hazy blur of muted colors. A dull ache throbbed behind her temples, a persistent reminder of something. She couldn't grasp it, the memory elusive, like smoke curling through her fingers. A figure shifted in the periphery, solidifying into the sharp angles of Rome Zimming's face. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something. Was it relief? Hope? He leaned closer, his voice a low murmur. Mengshi. Can you hear me? Mengshi. The name felt foreign on her tongue, yet strangely familiar. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, the words catching like burrs. He poured water from a glass by the bed, gently lifting her head to help her drink. The cool liquid soothed the burning in her throat, but did little to quench the thirst in her mind, the desperate yearning to remember. Take your time, Rong Ziming said, his hand hovering over hers, a hesitant touch that sent a shiver down her spine. Why did his touch feel so right? So comforting? It was a puzzle piece that refused to fit, a jarring note in the symphony of confusion in her mind. Days melted into a monotonous cycle of medical checks and bland hospital food. Rong Ziming was a constant presence, his concern a palpable entity in the room. He spoke of shared moments, of laughter and quiet evenings, of a life she couldn't recall. Each word was a pinprick, a gentle assault on the wall of amnesia that separated her from her past. We met at the university, he told her one afternoon, his voice laced with a wistful tenderness that tugged at something deep within her. You were studying literature, always with your nose buried in a book. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. I used to tease you mercilessly. Mengshi looked at him, a stranger telling her stories of her own life. His words painted a picture of a woman she couldn't recognize, a woman who was vibrant, witty, and full of life. Was that truly her? Or was this some elaborate dream, a cruel fabrication of her fractured mind? But there were flashes, fleeting glimpses of memory, a sun-drenched library, the scent of old books, a pair of laughing eyes that mirrored the warmth in Rong Ziming's gaze now. These fragments, though disjointed and incomplete, carried a weight of truth, a resonance that echoed in her soul. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of lavender and gray, Rong Ziming sat by her bedside, holding her hand. He spoke softly of his former love, Su Yang, the woman he thought he'd lost. His voice was thick with unshed tears, the pain of his loss a tangible ache in the room. Su Mengshi's heart clenched. Why did his grief feel like a betrayal, a sharp sting in her own chest? She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to erase the sorrow etched on his face. But her hand remained limp in his, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. I thought I'd lost you forever, Su Yang. Su Yang. The name struck a discordant chord, shattering the fragile illusion of peace. A wave of dizziness washed over her, followed by a surge of memories, vivid and sharp as broken glass. The carefully constructed facade of Su Cini crumbled, revealing the manipulative woman beneath. The charade, the lies, the calculated deception, it all came flooding back, a torrent of anger and betrayal. She abruptly withdrew her hand from his, the movement sharp and decisive. The confusion in his eyes mirrored the storm raging within her. You don't remember me? His voice was tinged with disbelief, a flicker of fear in his eyes. I remember everything, she said, her voice cold, the warmth replaced by a chilling detachment. I remember who I am, and who you thought I was. The color drained from Rong Ziming's face, his eyes widening in realization. He opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off, her voice laced with bitter irony. Then do you remember yourself? The silence hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of shattered illusions. Rong Ziming stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning horror. The truth, brutal and undeniable, settled between them like a shroud. In the following days, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Han Fei's confession, the revelation of Su Cini's true identity as Zhou Yuanyuan, the elaborate scheme orchestrated to deceive him, it all unfolded like a macabre play, each act more shocking than the last. Rome Zimming's world, once ordered and predictable, had been turned upside down. The woman he loved, the woman he mourned, had never truly existed. He had been living a lie, a carefully constructed illusion woven by a woman driven by greed and ambition. He sought out Su Mengshi, the Real Su Yang, the woman he had unknowingly married, the woman who had been living under the same roof, a silent observer of his grief and deception. He found her in the hospital garden, a solitary figure amidst the blooming roses. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheek, the strength in her jaw. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice thick with shame and regret. "There's nothing to say," she replied softly, her gaze steady, unwavering. "The truth is out. The deception is over." He reached out, hesitantly, as if afraid she would shatter like glass. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "I love you," he whispered, the words raw and vulnerable, a confession torn from the depths of his soul. Su Mengshi looked at him, her eyes searching his. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the depth of his love, and the flicker of hope for a future together. The future stretched before them, uncertain and fraught with the remnants of betrayal and deception. But in that shared gaze, in the silent understanding that passed between them, a new beginning took root, a fragile seed of hope planted in the fertile ground of forgiveness and love.